Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. This is the regularly scheduled Community Development Committee meeting of the Metropolitan Council. I'm the committee chair, Robert Lilligren. It's Monday, October 4th. And before calling the meeting to order, I would like to say a few things about how we'll conduct the meeting. We're still working under the impacts of COVID. It's causing us to alter our procedures. And so the Metropolitan Council Chair has determined it's not practical or prudent to conduct an in-person committee meeting because of COVID-19. Accordingly, the Met Council members will participate in this meeting by electronic means or phone, and the Community Development Committee meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021. It's being conducted by WebEx. It's being recorded. Members of the public will be able to monitor this meeting by going to the agenda online at the Met Council website and view the live stream. We will call roll for each business item. As you know, please only use the chat function, committee members, for technical difficulties and things like if you can't hear or something. So if there are no questions, I will call this meeting to order by asking Michelle to please take attendance by roll call to ensure we have a quorum. Michelle.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Lee. Lilligren.
Here.
Lindstrom.
Here.
Mousset.
Here.
Vento.
Here.
And excuse me, I forgot to mention that I did receive advance notice that Councilmember Johnson and Wolf will not be in attendance. Thank you.
Thanks. Councilmember Johnson and Councilmember Wolf, didn't you say, Michelle?
Correct.
As well, thanks. Thank you. We have a quorum and we can move on to our agenda. The first item is the agenda and it is posted at the Met Council website. Members can review it there. If there's no objections or changes, then we can move on to our business. Any changes or objections? Great, hearing none, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes of the September 20th regularly scheduled Community Development Committee meeting. Is there a motion, please?
Cummings moves approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Vento seconds.
Great, thanks. And I would note that we've been joined by Councilmember Lee. Any discussion or corrections on the minutes? Any discussion? Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll on the motion to approve the minutes.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Mousset.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That is adopted. And next is our consent agenda. There are 4 items on the consent agenda that staff had determined are not are routine and non-controversial. So it's the City of Plymouth Dundee Nursery Mixed Use Development Plan, City of Corcoran Land Use Corrections Comprehensive Plan Amendment, City of Lakeville Alderman Property Comprehensive Plan Amendment, and the City of Lakeville Rudder Property Comprehensive Plan Amendment. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda, please?
Vento moves approval. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Was that Councilmember Chambliss moving and Vento seconding? Is that?
That'll work.
Cool. All right. The motion is properly before us. Is there any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Mousset.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That item is adopted or those items, the consent agenda is adopted. And we'll move on to our one non-consent business item. It's item 2021-263. It's a joint committees item. It's the City of Anoka's 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. And Eric Wychick is here to present. Mr. Wychick, welcome.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Let me just try to go back here. Here we go. Great. Thank you so much. My name is Eric Wycheck. I'm a sector rep for District 9 in Anoka County. I work within the local planning group within the Community Development Division at the Council. I'd like the community to know that Doug Borgland, the City of Anoka's Community Development Director, and Clark Palmer, the city planner, both worked very hard on this plan. So I'm happy to have this here before you today, the City of Anoka 2040 plan. I would like to say too that it maybe makes sense that I'm here before you today with this plan, considering that Anoka is very famous for its Halloween celebration in the month of October. So those of you who have not or do not know much about it, the City of Anoka contends that it's the Halloween capital of the USA. So I would encourage you to look that up. There's a great history there. So in terms of regional systems, this map reflects figure 1 of the staff report and identifies the location of regional system components within the city of Anoka. There are 4 interceptors within this boundary of the city, US Highway 10 and US Highway, I'm trying to remember the other one here. There's two US highways that run through the city. Regional park system components within Anoka are Rum River and Mississippi River regional trails. Figure 2 from the staff report identifies the city as suburban community designation consistent with Thrive MSP 2040. Anoka is located in central Anoka County. It is surrounded by the communities of Andover, Ramsey, Coon Rapids, Champlin, and Dayton. Table 1, also in your staff report, shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts that the city will grow by 2,500 people, representing 1,000 households, and there will be an increase of 600 jobs in the city in the same time frame. Table 2 from the staff report shown here illustrates the planned residential density within the city. The overall density for guided residential land is expected to be between 16.4 and 33.1 units per acre. Communities with a suburban designation under Thrive are expected to plan for forecasted population and household growth at overall average densities of 5 units per acre and target opportunities for more intensive development near regional transit investments at densities in a manner articulated in the TPP. Anoka's plan is consistent with this policy. This map reflects the existing land use for the city of Anoka. The existing land uses in the city of Anoka are predominantly residential at 31.7%. The second largest land use in the city is parks and open space at 11.5%, followed by institutional land at 10.5%, and US highways 10, and the other US highway was 169, I apologize, and then Minnesota Trunk Highway 47 for major commercial and industrial corridors through the city. Given the city's major highway and freight corridors, Anoka has a decent proportion of industrial land at 9.7%, with a modest amount of commercial land at 3.5%. This map shows the future land use for the city of Anoka. The 2040 future land use map, figure 4 in your staff report. One significant change from the 2030 plan to the 2040 plan is the inclusion of 3 mixed-use categories, including commercial mixed use at 10% residential, mixed use with 20% residential, and the transit-oriented development land use with 50% residential. The city chose to use mixed-use categories to plan for redevelopment opportunities and to better serve its compact downtown and the commuter rail transit village area surrounding the North Star commuter rail station, as shown in Figure 5. Consistent with the requirements of the TPP, the plan guides land at residential densities averaging or exceeding 20 residential units per acre within a half a mile of the North Star Anoka commuter rail station. Staff find that the plan conforms with regional system plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. Council staff recommend the following proposed actions: that the Metropolitan Council authorize the City of Anoka to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, that the Metropolitan Council advise the city to adopt the Mississippi River Corridor Critical Area Plan within 60 days after receiving final DNR approval, and submit a copy of the final adopted plan and evidence of adoption to the DNR, Council, and National Park Service within 10 days after the adoption, and provide to the Council the date the watershed approved the amended local water management plan and the date the city adopted the amended local water management plan. And finally, to implement the advisory comments in the review record for water supply. The meeting schedule for this item on Tuesday, October 12th, the Environmental Services staff will present to the Environment Committee. And this item will also be on the Metropolitan Council agenda on the October 27th meeting. And I want to again thank the city for all of their efforts on this 2040 plan. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wycheck. Questions on that report? Any questions? Mr. Wycheck, I grew up near Anoka. It was where our local high school was when I was a kid. And I'll just slightly correct you. Anoka bills itself as the Halloween capital of the world, not just of the US, as he introduced it. So I didn't want to sell him short on that. If there's no discussion on that report, Mr. Wycheck has recommended a series of actions to approve the City of Anoka's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Is there a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
Second by
Thank
Lee.
you, Council. Thank you, Council Members Lindstrom and Lee. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musse,
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Thank you.
Chair?
Thank you, Michelle. That item is adopted. Yeah, Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question not just related to Anoka, but I see Ms. Torres is on the call as well. I'm just wondering, where are we now with our comprehensive plan approvals?
And Director Barajas. I just asked her the same question last week. So.
Oh,
Oh, or is it Ms. Torres?
Either one. I'm happy to take the question.
Please, Ann.
Yeah, I'm just pulling up our chart right now. The council has received 163 of 168 plans. So we've received most of them, about 97%. And then the council has authorized 146, which, if I remember correctly, was about 87% of plans. So we're still working, and the sector reps and the rest of my team are working diligently with communities to provide assistance on helping communities get those last few plans across the finish line. So we're continuing to work with our local government staff.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councilmember Cummings, for asking that. Ms. Torres, thanks to you, and that just represents a ton of excellent staff work. So thanks to you and your teams for all their good work.
Thank you very
Any
much.
other? Yeah, thank you. Any other questions before we move on the agenda? Okay, we will move into the information items. We have two of them on the agenda. The first is the Community Development Division 2022 to 2027 Capital Improvement Program. And Heather Augustin-Hebner is here to present. Heather, welcome.
Thank you, Chair, Council members. Are you able to hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. I'll give it just a minute while I'm waiting for the slide deck to pop up. Well, how about this? I'm gonna Let me just give me a second. Maybe they have some technical problems. I will pop it up on my screen and share it. Oh, never mind. Here we go. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so we'll start out today with just the general budget development feedback that you have that you've provided, and this is how we frame the budget presentations and the related programmatic presentations. One of the things that I will just note before we get started too deep into this presentation is that most of how we program our CIP is really driven by existing policy and statutes. So there's not as much, I would say, discrete decision making as we have in a lot of other areas of the budget. So I just want to say there's not as much detail in this presentation as you would normally see in some of our slides and on the operating side, but I'm happy to provide as much detail as I can. Next slide, please. All right, so just wanted to touch base about where we're at with our conversations. We continue to either have budget staff or the programmatic staff come before you to continue to give you updates. We're at the bolded section right now, Parks Capital Funding. And I think as I told you last time I was before you, the next big group of conversations that we're going to have is around the HRA. The Future Reimbursement Consideration Program is connected to the capital program. We did meet with parks implementing agencies about a week and a half ago. That conversation with you may go Q1 of 2022, but it's coming up. So I just want to give you a heads up that might change a little bit. But otherwise this fall, we're really going to talk pretty frequently on the Metro HRA. Next slide, please. Okay, so today we'll go through an overview of our capital program, and then we'll give you some more details on the Family Affordable Housing Program or our council-owned housing units and the Regional Parks and Open Space Program. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've walked you through these terms before. I am not going to read them all, but consider this your cheat sheet. When I say the word capital program, it's the multi-year plan that represents the authorized and planned. So right now we're working under the capital program of 21 to 26. We are looking to update that for the capital program for 22 to 27. And then we bring money in through budget amendments in the authorized capital program. Capital budget, that's our annual snapshot, and the CIP is the 6-year plan. Next slide, please. So let's start out with the council-owned housing units. Next slide, please. So last year, when Terry and I were before you in different presentations, we gave you a lot of background on council-owned housing. So if you're interested in more information or there's members of the public that are interested in more details, I would point you back to last year's presentation. We gave a really long overview of the history and how the council got into the business of owning houses around the region. So just a quick snapshot, there is a statute that enables the council to develop housing units. We do have a program where right now we own 150 homes. And right now we're having some interesting conversations about additional council-owned housing that includes the City of Edina partnership, which we've been talking with you about recently. And the council is also looking at a policy of what happens if we want to sell one unit and purchase another. And that's going to be something that's going to be coming before you here in Q4 of 2021. Next slide, please. So we do own houses and we do a lot of asset preservation work. So we've divided that work into 2 major buckets. For small ongoing repairs, those you're going to see in our operating budget in the unified budget. What we're talking about on the capital side are these large capital expenditures, and that's what's in our capital program. For years and years in our operating budget, we tracked both the smaller capital improvements and the larger ones. And what we've done to try and get a better sense for our asset management is we very intentionally split those into 2 different buckets. So we're tracking it differently if we're having to put on a new roof versus if we are fixing a piece of siding. whether we are having to fix one broken window would be in the operating side of the budget. On the capital side of the budget would be if we have to replace the windows in the entire home. So just kind of use those as kind of a litmus test of where items are programmed. Next slide, please. Okay, so on the asset preservation side, right now we've got $300,000 in our authorized capital program. That was seed money funded through the general purpose levy dollars. And that was a council strategic initiative a couple years back. Those funds are actively being spent down now. Between 22 and 27, right now we have $100,000 programmed each year, and that's funded by rental income that we earn from the houses that we own. On the home purchase side, right now we have $200,000 in the authorized program. We have one open offer on a house, and we're just waiting to for that homeowner to purchase another property, and then we're still planning to buy that home. And right now we don't have anything programmed in the 2022 to 2027 CIP. That's for a couple different reasons. Reason one is, as a quick reminder, the houses that we're purchasing with the city of Edina partnership, those dollars are never going to touch our capital program. So while we're intending to purchase those houses, we don't need funds in our authorized budget. The second reason is that right now there's some really robust conversation happening kind of at the staff level, developing a policy to bring before the council of how we're going to handle if we want to sell a house and then purchase another house. I imagine once the council settles that policy discussion, then you'll see an impact in the capital program. But I just want to let you know we don't have any money programmed in here right now. But the great thing about our capital program is it's a living, breathing document, and it can be flexible as different policy decisions are made. Next slide, please. So let's transition to regional parks and open space. Next slide, please. All right, you all know we have an amazing program. One of the joys of my job is getting to partner with the Parks Unit and get to see all of the amazing work that they do and the partnership that we have with our regional or with the parks implementing agencies. I think you all know we have a lot of visitors, over $63 million, over 63 million visits annually. We serve the Twin Cities region and beyond through a wide system of parks and trails and special recreation features. Next slide, please. Okay, last year I went through this slide in a little more detail since you were still kind of learning what was going on with the park system. I've consolidated it down to one slide now, so if anybody's looking for more information, I will, I can either answer those questions or I can point you to last year's presentation. So the regional parks and open space system, it's really a partnership between the state, the council, and the parks implementing agencies. The park implementing agencies are the foundation. They do the local planning, they do the master planning. The Metropolitan Council, we set the regional policies, the regional standards, we act as a fiscal agent. The state of Minnesota appropriates money and sets some high-level statutes, and all of us are bounded by trying to meet the regional needs and outcomes. We're pressured by economics and environmental factors. Political winds can shift this. Pandemics can shift what happens. And then we have legislative action that our state kind of agency partners and us all make sure that we have to abide within those. Next slide, please. So this is, I think you saw this slide last year too. It's the capital project life cycle. And I like to show this slide because it shows a lot of the areas different agencies, whether it be a state partner, the council, or parks implementing agencies, have more or less influence at different parts of this capital project life cycle. So the council partners, with the community, with our parks implementing agencies, with MPOSC to really set Thrive MSP 2040. And that's where we have the assumptions, the understanding, the goals, and the objectives. There's the regional parks policy plan. So that is where we as a council get to say, these are the standards that we're going to use with our system. The parks implementing agencies then build the regional parks and trails master planning and their capital improvement programs and ours. And that regional master trail planning is where they're really engaging with the community. They're looking at equity impacts to make sure that they have hit the equity requirements that the council policy guides have set forward. Once we have money programmed in our capital improvement program and the agencies, then we secure funding, then we authorize the funding through grant agreements, and then we measure our performance collectively. Next slide, please. So our money, 100% of the parks funding that we get, either from the state or that we provide as a council, 100% of that goes to our implementing agency partners. Right now, we've got about 182 active grants valued at about $162 million. And we're planning about $234 million in grants between 22 and 27. Parks and Trails Legacy, that is state dollars matched by council bonds that's issued out by formula. Our Parks Acquisition or Land Acquisition Program, there's state money and council money. It's first come, first served for implementing agencies. On the bonding side, it's state and council funds, and that's allocated to implementing agencies by formula. And the equity grant program, it's funded with council bonds and interest earnings. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And that's a competitive program where the council has discretion to set the scoring criteria and then award those grants. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we do every year is we take a look at every funding source that we have and just try and make the most reasonable revenue assumptions that we can. And so this is kind of the world that we play in to build that capital program. So first, what we do is on Legacy, Parks and Trails Legacy Fund or Legacy, we take what we know as the most recent appropriations or most current data that we have, and then we make an estimate of what annual growth is going to look like. So in this year, we took our calendar year 2022, and then we assumed a 2% annual inflation on that. So that gives us our dollar amount for legacy every year. And then what we do is we distribute that legacy dollars to each of the implementing agencies based on an established formula. So when you look at the details in our CIP, each of our implementing agency partners will be able to see exactly how much they're allocated in each year. And then once we have specific appropriations and the most up-to-date data for the formula calculations, we recalculate those. And they're generally pretty close, but there is sometimes a really, really modest amount of fluctuation. Environmental and natural trust fund dollars, as a quick reminder, those are competitive grants that the council tries to get. So we will write a grant application, we will submit it, and if we get those dollars, then we will grant those to park implementing agencies as they come in. Right now, we're just assuming kind of a flat line, about $750,000 annually. Now, I will tell you, like in reality and in practice, we don't necessarily get grants every year. We might not get any money one year. It might be slightly higher in another year. And on average, it's about $750,000 a year. And when and if we did get a grant that was higher than this, we would come back and have a conversation with the council about that. But in general, we've always been able to fairly easily manage the competitive funding that we get in from that program. The next piece of money is the state of Minnesota bonds. We're not assuming any growth in that. We're assuming $15 million of state funds. And then this should have $10 million of council match also. So sorry about that. And the council bonds, we have to develop a fiscally constrained budget. And how we are fiscally constrained is by state revenue and by council match. At any point in time, we can, by statute, we can only have $40 million of council bonds out on the street at any point in time. Now, we have not been close to that $40 million cap. Like we just have not, because we haven't had as much state money to match. But when we're building our CIP, it has to be fiscally constrained. So we are building that on these revenue assumptions and programming our match accordingly. Now, we do use bond dollars more than once. So there will be some bond dollars used in like calendar year 22. And our assumption is that we can use some of those same dollars in 2027 because some of those grants will be closed. So some of the bond dollars are essentially used twice because we assume we'll have more room under that $40 million cap. So we do match $2 to every $3 of state money in ENRTF, state bonds, and then legacy land acquisition. So when we get legacy dollars, 90% of that goes to our parks implementing agencies based on a formula, and another 10% of that is carved off for land acquisition. And then we also do fund the Regional Parks Equity Grant Program. What you'll see in this CIP, actually, it's on another slide. So why don't we hit the next slide, please? Okay, so what you're seeing today is really last year's CIP, and we added 2027. So the notable modifications are from a council investment or a council match perspective, we've added $3.1 million of council match in 27. Now you're going to see that in even years, there's a higher council match because we're assuming bond dollars are coming in even years. So in the odd years, the council match is lower. And that is to match the programs that I just talked about, legacy money, and to fund the equity grant program. So if you look at this by program, in 2027, we've added about $26 million of Parks and Trails legacy, and that includes the state money and the council match. We've added 1.2 in Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. Again, that's state money with council match. About $1 million for the Regional Parks Equity Grant Program. For those of you paying really close attention, last year when we presented it, we'd been programming, somewhere, depending on how much bond capacity we had about closer to, high 400s to low 600s every year. The pilot project has gone on long enough that staff are pretty confident that that's going to be an every year or every other year program. So we've planned the CIP accordingly. So it's the same amount of money. We've just budgeted it every other year so that it syncs up with when the grant solicitation processes would happen. And we're not assuming any bond dollars in 27. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've talked about state bonding, Parks and Trails legacy, and council match. So of the formula money, that's about $201 million. So these are going to be locally selected and prioritized projects that comply with all of the regional standards. So by the time these projects go out the door in grant dollars, they will have the projects are meeting all of the regional standards and have been brought through MPOSC. So a lot of these projects are, like, for example, right now we are building a list of projects for potential bond funding. And once we know how much bond funding we're going to get in the governor's recommended budget, then the agencies will finalize their project selection, and then we'll start the conversation with MPOSC and all of those regular check marks that we go along the way. Next slide, please. For the land acquisition project, for the land acquisition program, we're imagining that we're going to have about $31 million. And again, that's funded by those competitive grants that the council requests from the state, Parks and Trails legacy money, and then our council match. Next slide, please. Regional Equity Grant Program between 22 and 27, there's about $2.5 million planned. Right now it's council bonds. Now I just want to be real over, we don't have any interest earnings programmed right now. The programming decision for those, so those dollars, the programming decision will happen in sync with when the regional solicitation timelines are. Interest earnings aren't necessarily solely a capital item, so we didn't want to get ahead of council action on that. So just know that the next time the equity grant program comes before you as a council, part of that conversation is going to be, would you like to program some of the interest earnings into that program? And if so, then we'll bring those into the authorized capital program. Next slide, please. So when you take our capital program, again, the authorized and the plan together, and this includes both council-owned housing units and the park system, it's just shy of $400 million. You can see that most of the money, about 74% of it, goes to our parks implementing agencies partners based upon a formula. The rest of it goes to land acquisition through first come, first served. The equity grant program is competitive. The Metro HRA is basically taking care of what we have. And that governmental unit section, those are direct appropriations that have come out of legislative session. So those are basically projects that the council has really no hand in planning or requesting. It's just the legislature says, we shall manage the money that is directly going to agency X for project Y. But that is part of our authorized capital program, and we're the fiscal agent for that, so we include it. We do not have any of direct appropriations in our planned project. We'll just bring them into our authorized plan as we need to. About 85% of the money in our capital program is state money. The $59 million of regional money, that's our bond funding. And then that just the tiny little other revenues, that's council-owned housing rental income for our planned asset management and council-owned housing. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you take away, so the first slide had the authorized and the plan. These just indicate the plan of what's going to happen in 22-27. It's very similar to what you saw on the previous slide, except that other governmental units piece or the direct appropriations has been stripped out. So the vast majority of money goes to the parks implementing agencies for formula grants. The rest is first come, first serve, land acquisition, and then we'll fund the equity grant funds. Now, I just want to acknowledge that there's some rounding that happened with the equity grant funds, just to make the numbers add up. The previous slide said $2.5 million. That is about what it is, but just when you're dealing with millions of dollars, the rounding sometimes doesn't work perfectly. On the sources side, again, most of the money is from the state. We have our regional bond match, and we have our council-owned housing rental income for our other revenues. Next slide. All right, so this is the timeline that the whole council is working from. So on October 13th, you are going to see the capital program for all of the divisions rolled together. Then that information will roll into the public comment draft that you'll have before you on October 27th. Then we'll enter into the public comment period. And then after that, on December 8th, there will be the adoption of the capital program and annual capital plan. This general information has been shared with the parks implementing agencies. We met with them before we met with you. So what I did for them is I recapped our 21 to 26 CIP, the one that you have already seen and adopted, so that they had a good idea of what our program is, how we put it together, and then we'll be circling back around with them kind of as a second step, just because we generally share all of the most up-to-date budget information with the council before we share it with external partners, but they will be getting the same information as well. Next slide, please. All right, so this is what we've got on deck. So I'm not gonna speak on this again, but just up a lot of Metro HRA conversations. Next slide, please. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Heather, for that presentation and for all you and your team's work on this. Questions on that presentation, committee members? Any questions? Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson.
Hey, everybody. Just wondering, did the implementing agencies have any questions or concerns about the timeline or anything like that?
Chair committee members, no, they didn't really have any questions. I think some of them did learn that the $40 million cap is statutory. I think some of them thought that was a council policy decision. So my sense is that was the biggest aha moment for some of our agency partners. But otherwise, I mean, it's pretty clear cut, a lot of it. So there weren't a lot of questions. We're just trying to work with them to make sure they understand what is in our CIP to hopefully give them some more information as they build their CIP. So we're hopefully a little bit closer in sync. And I'm not saying closer in sync because I think there's been a problem. It's just we want to make sure that if we have information that we're sharing it with them so they can use it as appropriate in their budgeting processes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further questions for Heather on on this report. We'll be seeing this again. Thanks for the approval schedule. This is just an information item, so there's no action that's required. Any other questions? Seeing none, thanks again, Heather, and to all the folks that contributed to the capital improvement program draft. And we'll move on. Yeah, thank you. We'll move on to our final information item, final item for the evening. It is the evaluation of livable communities tax base revitalization account seeding equitable environmental development, or SEED grant category. I know Ms. Beard is here to answer questions, but the presentation will be done by Marcus Martin. Mr. Martin, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for putting this item on your agenda today. I'll be going over some background initially about the intent and some of the administration of the program, and we'll have some discussion questions, some suggested questions at the end. Next slide, please. So the original purpose for this, it was a 2-year pilot. It targeted sites in areas of concentrated poverty that would allow awarding contamination cleanup funds or investigation funds, actually, to projects without an identified development project. The goal at that time was creating jobs and catalyzing redevelopment. Next slide, please. So the amount of funding has varied during the time that we've offered it. It's ranged between about 250,000 to $1 million. The grant activities are limited to activities related to brownfield redevelopment. So initially, that was mostly environmental investigation. We also allow use of funds for abatements, like asbestos abatements or lead-based paint. And later, it could be used for partial soil cleanup for projects that had an approved cleanup plan. As I mentioned in the prior slide, the geography was areas of concentrated poverty within cities that are participating in the Livable Communities Act program. And I probably mentioned this a few times. It was intended to catalyze redevelopment. We're looking for areas really that we would maybe, another way of looking at it is considering it a coal market. Next slide, please. So this slide shows kind of a timeline. So as we started in 2015, we renewed the approval in 2015, it was really just considered a pilot, a test. We renewed the approval for the grant category in 2017. At that time, we also added housing and expanded the program geography slightly to include parcels that were across the street, say, from the boundaries that we use. We also expanded the use of funds to include partial soil cleanup at that time with approved cleanup plan. And to kind of reflect the fact that it was not a pilot anymore with the renewal, we changed the name to the SEED acronym. So way over here on the right, today we would like to discuss with you kind of clarify and affirm the intended purpose of that grant category in preparation for next year's fund distribution plan. Next slide, please. Shown in this slide is a map of the prior SEED awards. The SEED awards are shown as orange circles. I've included the other TBRA grants as shown in kind of light gray, and the target area is shown in kind of that light purple area. We have awarded 24 grants totaling 1.6 million. Most of that total was awarded to one project in the city of Hopkins. That was if you know it, it was the former cold storage site related to transit-oriented development. All of the other SEED requests and awards have been made in either Minneapolis or in St. Paul. Slide, please. Here is a bar chart showing the awards by year. So you can see both the amounts requested shown in green and, or excuse me, the amounts that requested shown in green, the amounts that we had available each year in blue, and those numbers at the top, those black numbers represent the number of grants that we made each year. So the good news is we've awarded, nearly 100% of all the requests that we received. We had one that was withdrawn by an applicant during the evaluation period. I think the less good news from this slide is that we get few applications each year, and only about a third of the funding made available has been requested. 70% of the funding, on the other hand, that has been awarded has been spent. Some of that changes just based on some newer grants that we just awarded, haven't had time to be used yet. No grant has been relinquished, so that's also good news. Next slide, please. This figure here is shown to give you a sense of what has been done with the funding. This chart shows 23 projects instead of the 24 grant outcomes, because one of the projects received grants in both the first year of the pilot in 2015 and then later again in 2020. So we're only looking at projects this time, not grants. And then as I mentioned just before, that there are some grants that were recently awarded that were not spent. Those are shown in blue. So most of them have been in this partially spent status. And a few, 3, have attracted additional grants or other funding. But none of them have started construction. Next slide, please. So we have been asking for feedback on the program from other grantors, from county staff, from community development staff, cities, all that are of which are eligible to apply for the grant category. And we've also talked with some of the partner organizations like the Consortium for Community Developers, Metro Cities, and so forth at different times. That themes in the responses that we found are listed on this slide. We heard that we need to get in front of developers at the right time, or that often developers, they won't wait for a grant opportunity. Many cities with eligible areas said they don't have redevelopment issues with contaminants or that deal with contaminants, or they weren't redeveloping in the target areas for this grant category. The cities that had some redevelopment said they would only consider using a seed grant on publicly owned sites. And some said they didn't know about the program, or they didn't start thinking about redevelopment until there was a redevelopment concept in place. But we did have another city that said by not requiring a project, a redevelopment project, it allowed them to be more strategic. For some, not requiring a project also made it less clear when they could apply. So if you think of kind of, what is the status exactly between no project and project? What if there was a development concept, say? What if the site could be sold soon? Or what if there already was some kind of interest or drawings on the project, but maybe not something concrete. So a couple individuals more familiar with the super RFP process used in Minnesota housing for redevelopment, they preferred kind of not choosing among the grant categories. So thinking about each of the 3 TBRA categories. Seed is one of them, but we also have an investigation grant category, and we have a cleanup grant. Others commented that they had just more pressing needs, like demolition or removing structurally poor soils. Others were interested in just other uses completely, rebuilding after damages, or redesigning strip shopping centers, or urban farming. Different uses than are part of this grant category. And we did have some comments that individuals would not prefer not having a matching cost. There is a matching cost when there is investigation. Next slide, please. So shown here is those same areas of concentrated poverty that we saw before, and kind of in that light purple shading. But instead of just looking at it as a single item, I've listed here the generalized existing land uses within those target areas. So I wanted to show this to point out that while there are both commercial and residential areas shown on the map, city staff has told us that there has been kind of low demand for redevelopment in these target areas, and particularly for the single family areas shown in yellow on the slide. So there often isn't an immediate need to address contamination until that redevelopment interest occurs. So in summary, the program, it has been more accessible. It focuses attention on areas of high need, like underinvested areas or coal markets. It has been useful for publicly owned sites, but not all of the money has been spent. The program has had kind of declining participation at times. Areas that are primarily housing or residential, especially small or single family lots that don't have a history of contamination or are not expected to be redeveloped, don't have a need for seed grant before our redevelopment concept is proposed. Other investigation sources like the Hennepin County Environmental Response Fund can be easier to get for some of the uses like the environmental investigation. More outreach is often the first suggestion we hear for any grant program that has the characteristics that this one has, particularly outreach to private sector parties and nonprofits. However, the benefit of added communication often depends on how often the staff or members of the organizations focus on redevelopment that involves remediation among its services. So not all redevelopment has that kind of brownfield challenge. Recent additional outreach to the nonprofit and public staff over the past 2 years has not significantly changed the interest in the grant category, but broad outreach is a good practice. Nevertheless, that's true for this grant program as well as the other categories. No projects without a developer have attracted additional investment to date. And while one city commented that the program does allow them to be more strategic, such as in corridors or other areas that are a priority rather, for redevelopment. In short, the most common community response to the SEED program has been, it's nice to have when it applies, but it often doesn't apply to redevelopment here in our community. Next slide, please. So with kind of keeping those kind of administrative issues, those kind of original intent in mind, we pose some suggested questions for discussion that we'd like to hear from you. The first is this aspect of what is the primary purpose of the SEED grant program? And what we'd like you to think about when you're considering that purpose, we'd like you to think about whether the SEED grant should be offered to support investigation and cleanup on sites in underinvested communities, even if the grants don't show a potential for catalyzing redevelopment, or should SEED grants focus on projects in underinvested communities that have been disproportionately impacted by environmental contamination? So we're looking at that difference between sites and projects. So I'm going to stop there maybe before we go to the second question.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. And Councilmember Lee has had his hand up for a bit, so I'll call on him first, please. Councilmember Lee.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mr. Martin. My question is, if after 6, 7 years, none of the projects have been, shovel ready yet, is that kind of a standard thing, or is there a lot of red tape at the local level, or how come it seems so long that since 2015, none of these projects have um, been shovel ready yet?
Thank you, Council Chair and Council Member. That is the question that we noticed, or the trend rather that we noticed as well. I think that has to do with when that first grant was awarded, right? There isn't necessarily a development concept at the time, and so it takes a while to build that development concept. Um, One of the things that we noticed is that often projects they do need uh, you know basically a champion. They need someone who says, I would like to do this, whatever that future redevelopment is, and to kind of coordinate and really help kind of push that new vision forward. So I would attribute that to that slow pace. The other thing that I would say is that while the seed grants are helpful in overcoming a particular challenge related to contamination, redevelopment financing often requires significant more financing. And we do offer that support in, like, for example, for pre-development in other grant categories, just not this one.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, council member. Further questions and discussion, council member Chambliss.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the question posed to us, should it be site-based or project-based? If I'm understanding correctly, we're not getting a lot of activity from the project, so I'm thinking maybe site-based might work in terms of being proactive with the outreach. And I do have some questions about the outreach. Are we working with organizations or developers, like nonprofits or developers, asking them, do you have some areas that you'd like to develop in? Some of those areas, or many of those areas in the ACAPs do have contaminated ground, or even contaminated buildings. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about what kind of outreach we're doing proactively, or even telling people, we've investigated certain sites and these are potentially eligible for development. You may have an opportunity to apply for this grant. So can you speak more to that?
Sure, Mr. Chair, Councilman, thank you for the question. Yeah, I think, the outreach that we do really follows that, we contact, of course, all cities and community development staff that are, that have an eligible area. So that's one thing that we do. We go beyond that when we talk to, folks that have either applied to the council before or we know that do redevelopment. So, we reach out through professional organizations like the consortium of community developers. We reach out to Minnesota APA. We reach out to the Economic Development Association of Minnesota. These are places where there are just a greater audience of members that are looking for different help. Now we also, I do a lot of work just calling individual people that, if they've shown interest. I mean, we reached out to programs that I think are compatible, staff liaisons to, for example, the Minneapolis Commercial Property Development Fund. We've talked to folks that, do urban gardening in the city, if that is something that they would find beneficial. We have talked to, places where maybe there is an enterprise zone, and there's a coordinator for that to see if they know about projects that are being developed. So I would say that we reach out as much as we can, but if you have certainly organizations that we are not talking to that you believe we should, we certainly can add those as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, council member. I have in queue council members Cumming, then Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an interesting presentation, and I know that the seed money has been challenged because the perception may be that it has not been as successful as perhaps we wanted, and we like to see our dollars being used, and certainly our resources are limited. I guess I would argue that the money is certainly in the Hopkins development that you mentioned, extremely successful. While that project has not yet been built, I think it allowed for the city to think much more strategically and much more expansively, and because there was another government agency involved, the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, you have a couple of agencies that have differing agendas that have to come together for the overall good. That's a 17-acre site in a fully developed city that now has a proposal in front of it that really captures many, many, many of the goals of the Metropolitan Council as far as density and housing and affordability and all of those things. And I think that that was a significant grant, and it was significant to the city, but it was significantly important to this development, which is now working its way through the city process, where there were some hiccups along the way that maybe caused some delays, but I think it was just critically important. So I think rather than I think we need to be careful not to think of these as not being successful grant awardments, especially given that it can be for something that isn't currently planned. That's way out there, and those things we know are going to take lots of time. So I would use that as an example of something that was extremely successful use of seed money grant, and will really reinforce in the upcoming development as it's proposed and as it will probably be executed, something that will be probably certainly would have been more challenging without that seed grant money. I guess do we have to focus on site or project? Can it be both? Can it be somehow incorporated so that we can offer it both directions? And I guess too, and I know this has come up before, it's kind of that same question of how are we getting the word out that this might be a grant that is applicable to a site or to a development. And I trust, because staff is always thinking outside of the box and looking at different ways, but I think we need to look again at how we are doing our outreach and to whom and when and all of those things, because it is kind of an obscure category. I think it may be a little bit more challenging for those who might be able to take advantage of it to really sort of think, well, gosh, we may have a use for that, or it would be worth our time, especially in these days where everybody's staff is stretched. And so I would encourage us to continue to creatively reach out and to look at this as expansively, these dollars as expansively possible as far as how they can be used. Because I think that I think it can be money that is very, very important to driving home our specific objectives. And so I really like your presentation. I know it's a challenge, but I think it's been a success. I would define it as a success, and am living it in the Hopkins community. So that's how I view it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Ms. Beard, did you want to make a comment? You came on camera. I just didn't know if you were looking to say something.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I realize, I just sort of realized, like, if I'm here to answer questions and you stated I was here to answer questions, I should at least open my video, turn my camera on. But since you asked, I really appreciate thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Cummings, I really appreciate your comments. And I think I want to sort of make sure it's clear that the Hopkins, the question we have at hand here is that the purpose of the program was to incentivize development. So it's been interesting in kind of evaluating these past awards with Marcus. talking through each of these grant awards and talking through what's happened on those sites since, and kind of having this thought of, would development have happened anyway? In which case TBRA would have 100% been an eligible award process to fund the cleanup of the site for that development. Is maybe the fact that it's in an area of concentrated poverty or in an underinvested area a reason that we should, or a thing that we should prioritize even more highly than we already do in the regular TBR program? And how do we kind of address this challenging nature of when is a project a development project and when is it just an empty site with no potential for future development that we know of, but because it's in an underinvested area, it's technically eligible to use this funds. I think it's also really important. So I just want to say, I think you can consider if the purpose of SEED is the correct purpose, and if the outcomes are the outcomes we want to see. I think you can think of that. You don't have to think of that in terms of if that changes, that would have made the Hopkins storage site, for example, not eligible for TBRA cleanup dollars. I think there are ways to achieve that that could live within SEED or not. The other point I just want to make too is that it is really important to remember that the enabling legislation for TBRA is extremely focused on net tax capacity increase and job creation and housing creation. So I think that need to connect seed dollars to the catalytic potential for development and redevelopment is something to take seriously and think and consider about this program. So I think we all agree that the ability to use the TBR funds to focus on underinvested areas is really, really important, and we all agree that we need to do that. I think what we'd really like to explore is if we're doing it in the most useful way.
Thanks, Tara. Molly, anything else, or Councilmember Cummings? Well, next in queue is Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson.
Thank you, Chair. One of my questions is just wondering about, wow, really bright, sorry, maybe figure out my camera lighting here, but I'm wondering about are there aspects of cleanup that impact community that they'll benefit from? I'm assuming there are, regardless if a project ever happens there or not. Like, and I wonder to what degree, if there's kids that play in that open lot, or I'm making up stories in my mind about what some of these spaces look like. But even though there's not a project there, do those places continuing to be polluted pose a risk? And then I would assume in some communities a risk to water quality for those that are in communities where they may, if there's overlap, rely on well water, for example. But I'm really thinking about just the everyday community walking past these spaces and living in these spaces that are polluted. To me, speaks volumes about the value of doing cleanup regardless if there's a project or not.
Mr. Chair, Councilmembers, thank you for the question. Yes, I think that there is an aspect of health that's related to brownfields, right? This idea of making a site safe for some use. That might involve a residential use, a commercial use, maybe there's even an open space component to it, and so forth. But when it comes to just kind of general environmentalism, right? Brownfields are really about they're not emergency type situations. They're not situations where it's something that this is something that's actively a risk to community. They're more about chronic situations, like long-term risks. If those uses are changed. So we really don't look to brownfield funding for resolving kind of just general area-wide kind of contamination issues. They're always tied to some sort of redevelopment use. I think that's probably the closest approximation to your question, if I understood.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson.
I think I got an answer. I mean, I'm okay with, we got to clean up stuff, whether we're going to use it now or use it later. We need to clean it up. And if it's going unused because there aren't projects, then That's just my 2 cents. I don't think but thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank
I
you.
guess I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I guess I just want to add that risk factor is what the difference is, right? The risk is related to the use, and if the even those vacant lots, those aren't considered high risk. They're considered a risk when, depending on that use.
Thank you. Further discussion, Council Member Lindstrom? Yeah, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Urban Land Institute and Minnesota Brownfields, were they on your list for consultation as well?
Yes, we have worked with Minnesota Brownfields. The Urban Land Institute is a very good suggestion. I will add that to our list.
Follow-up question, if I may. I am, after listening to the presentation, kind of thinking along the mend it but don't end it kind of thinking here, and we've modified this program before back in 2017 after the pilot. Maybe it's time for a modification as well, and I like the idea of making it more expansive or easier. I mean, you mentioned people go to Hennepin County, the Hennepin County program, because it's perceived to be just easier to get. And I'd be curious to know what makes it easy, what makes ours hard, and how do we make ours easier to access?
Mr. Chair, Councilmembers, the ease really is related to timing. So, right, development can really happen at interest can happen at any time. And what makes the Hennepin County program different is that they will kind of accept an application at any time. In our statute, we have been restricted to offering funding cycles. And so that has been something where the frequency of, we offer it twice a year. We cover the year in terms of eligible, what is eligible. But that ease of being able to kind of apply for it whenever it comes up has been one of the challenges that we haven't been able to overcome.
Councilmember Lindstrom.
Is there any reason that we couldn't adopt that same model? Any legal reason or policy reason, or could we?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, to me that is an interesting challenge. What I've been told by our legal staff is no, that we have to stick to designated funding cycles. We can't offer it on an as-needed basis. So I followed that advice.
Thank you. Councilmember Lindstrom, anything? Is that it?
It'd be not. Yeah, no, not really. It'd be nice to have a little flexibility in that area and think creatively around that. But yes, generally following the legal advice is good advice.
Agree. And Mr. Martin, you said statutory language, correct, that we're doing?
Correct. The offering in terms of cycles is in statute.
Thank you. I have in queue Councilmembers Chambliss, then Councilmember Vento. Councilmember Chambliss.
I just wanted to provide a response to what Ms. Beard said earlier. And I'd be interested in, based on the fact that the money's not getting used, and we've got, some theories about why, that we do further exploration into seeing how we can get the money used for it more often for its intended purpose.
Thank you, Councilmember. And then if I can ask Councilmember Lee, I think your hand is up from before, but I just want to verify. So if I can please remind council members to lower their hands. I can't lower them. I don't have that authority. Further discussion, Councilmember Vento.
Yes, Marcus and Tara, thank you very much for this presentation. I'm curious as to how much of a discussion there's been with both the legal staff and with Judd about the possibility of a statutory change and seeking that. I would think that the legislature would be as interested as we are in getting those resources out there. And if they know that the current provision, the current language is posing a challenge for getting those funds used in a meaningful way, I would think they'd be open to it.
Mr. Martin, did you have a comment or maybe
I
Ms.
do.
Beard? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I want to clarify that in the program itself, the grant program, the TBRA grant program, is oversubscribed. That where it is most oversubscribed, however, is in the category, the most popular category of high need, which is cleanup. People want to focus on the cleanup itself. It really is this particular category where the demand has gone up and down. So what I would say that we have not had any discussion, at least that I've been involved in, that focuses on legislative changes to the program overall. But it's our discussion has really been more about one category rather than the entire account.
Councilmember Vento? Well, thanks. Councilmember Lindstrom?
Just following up on that, do you think that that really is a significant barrier? The timing of this, or are we just chasing our tails here a little bit?
Mr. Chair, council members, I think I think it's an aspect that would, it would improve improve the outreach of the program and the ability to apply. I think it's hard, it would have to be somewhat like prior changes. We would have to make it and really assess the results. I don't have a prediction about how much it will change.
Thank you. Ms. Beard?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I can just jump in on that conversation too. It's a really good conversation. I'll throw out that it can be really difficult to hold a competitive process when you're kind of doing a revolving cycle versus a kind of a everybody gets to be looked at the same time. And twice a year, just given the amount of time it takes to give folks a month or two to apply, provide that kind of technical assistance, get the applications in, review them, score them, and recommend approvals. That's almost a 6-month process as is. So holding kind of twice a year feels fairly effective from my standpoint. Changing to a kind of rolling or ongoing cycle for any of the LCA programs would be a really big change that I'd want to think a lot about before even knowing if I'd personally recommend that change or not. It provides us, we have a set of programs here that are funded annually through tax base collected annually to be funded in the next year. And it all is, it's very aligned and structured in ways that really help us kind of, document our process and be transparent and be fair in the process. So I do agree with Marcus that applicants, would probably find it more approachable and we might get more applications. I'm not sure I think that would be worth some of the unintended consequences. We can absolutely continue the conversation, but just wanted to offer some other thoughts on that perspective as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this first question, or Mr. Martin, did you want to move us on to the second question?
Yes, thank you. So the second question, and I know that some of you have thought of this, responses that have thought of this second question. The second question is, what is the best way to achieve the purpose of the seed grants? So in this example, we're kind of thinking of that idea of, do we keep the seed program as is? I heard a suggestion, do we change it to include sites with projects or without? Do we change the program some way to make the timing different for the program? So if you have other ideas about how we should achieve the purpose, or if you have, particularly if you have another purpose in mind. I'd like to hear those two.
Committee members, I'll start here, Mr. Martin, and uh, this sort of how do we continue it? I think it's worth continuing, right? And I really like Councilmember Cummings' framing of this. It's really a success. It may be success over time, but really that there's some successes. And of course, in your home community, Councilmember Cummings, it's just a brilliant success. So, and it's been in our budget now for what, 6 years? It'll be 7 years. And so we're accustomed to it being there. And so I wouldn't want to sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I do think it's just right to be having these conversations and to see if there are better ways to to tweak the program so that it achieves what we're trying to achieve and it gets used in a robust way. And a couple of things come to my mind, and that's sort of the most contaminated areas. So is that a metric that we would use? And these aren't, I lived for what, 36 years in the arsenic triangle, for example, in the Phillips area of South Minneapolis. Are there ways, there are certain communities you want to target? So I guess overall, the overarching idea would be to target, set priorities for targeting the program, and and the other thing are the very local sort of efforts that are going on, sort of like planning efforts. In my world, it's cultural districts and cultural corridors, right? But throughout the metro, I'm sure there'd be other areas where there are these hyper local uh, planning efforts or redevelopment efforts or interests in developing. They may not have projects yet specifically, but I'm guessing, just knowing the nature of a lot of the communities that are doing this kind of work, that there would be eligible sites within those efforts. So is that another metric that we can put on? So we're starting to focus this down. So the outreach efforts, that Councilmember Chalmers was talking about, so that we can get really focused and specific. And I would suspect that there would be potential developments and developers in those areas that may be from a class of developers that we're interested in supporting, if that's emerging developers, community-based developers. So I feel like we could refine this with more specific metrics. Thanks. Anyone? Yeah, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yes, I like looking at specific metrics. Um, I also would like to maybe dig a little bit deeper into the historical aspects of why this initiative is here in the first place, um, and why we're targeting areas of concentrated poverty. I mean, we all know that, unfortunately, um, discrimination happened in terms of where um, contamination occurred and how it occurred, and this may be one of the ways to remedy that. And I do know of a project, for example, that was contaminated, and the city wanted to, redevelop, but the contamination kind of was, a big part of whether or not they were going to decide to redevelop or not. So if they had the incentive not to, here and not have to worry so much about the contamination cost, there might be more opportunities for development. So I want to hear more about the historical aspects and what some of the barriers are for people applying or not even applying, or communities, ACAP communities that have historically been overlooked or forgotten. And maybe that's why we don't have people applying. So I want to dig deeper into this.
Well, thanks. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks. And just bouncing out this conversation about data, um, I was just thinking maybe looking at whether or not we use that ACAP metric is the right one to use. And I was reminded that the MPCA has a map of what do they call it? Areas of concern, environmental justice areas of concern, which incorporates poverty, people of color, tribal areas, NPCA air pollution score, and other metrics. And when I look at that map, it appears to be a broader map than the one we are using of just ACAP.
Thank you. Further discussion? Comments, question? Yeah, Mr. Martin. Oh, I'm sorry. Who was that?
You can't see me, I mean, because I'm trying to switch computers because I lost connection, so I'm sorry
Okay.
interrupted.
Councilmember Chambliss.
But I missed the last part because of my computer connection of what Councilmember Lindstrom said about other ACAPS areas.
Did you miss the question, Reva, or the response?
I think I missed the question.
Okay, cool. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Sure, I can just restate real quickly, thinking about the ACAP, maybe there's a different metric we can use, and I pointed towards the NPCA map of environmental justice areas of concern, which looks at people in poverty, BIPOC, tribal areas, language, and the NPCA air pollution score for data points. And it's a broader map than just ACAP.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think that just and restating the same thing, which is pretty much exploring, the history, looking at where we're starting from before we start moving away from anything, I think is important.
Well, great, thank you. And further discussion. Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chair, I want to say that there is significant overlap between the target area that we currently use and the MPCA area, but we certainly could change that geography as well.
Thank you. Committee members, any further input for Mr. Martin on this? Hearing none, Mr. Martin. I think you have a couple more slides, right? Next steps.
Yes, thank you. So we will be following up on what we heard today. We are going to take back your comments, and we're going to return in February with aspects of what we should change in terms of the eligibility and the scoring criteria that match some of the things that we've heard today. And then at a later point, we'll be coming back with specifically how much funding should be in that category from the funding that we have available. So there'll be two steps. There'll be February, we'll talk about this program in particular again. And then the final recommendations will be part of the overall Livable Communities Fund distribution plan at that time. So once before February and then once in February is what I should say.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Questions on the timeline or on anything that was presented here? Any questions? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Martin, for your work, for your team, Tara, for your whole team's work on this. I really look forward to seeing this when it comes forward again. Somehow you and your team always manage to take these scattershot comments and make them make sense in a comprehensive programmatic way. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And to that we have reached the end of our agenda. Yep, the end of our agenda. Director Barajas, Michelle, do you have anything else for us today?
I don't have anything to report.
Cool. All right. And committee members, seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned. Thanks for your excellent work. See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye,
Have a good
everyone.
week.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
evening, everyone.
You.